Welcome back to another one of my boring presentations. Tonight we're going to talk about the Battle of the North Cape, simplified, and you'll see why in a second, or killing Scharnhorst. So here are the Germans that are involved in this battle. So we're not going to talk about most of them. We're going to simplify this as much as possible, otherwise we're going to be here all day. The books that are written on this are this thick, and that's still the 30,000 foot overview. Here are the British. So this is not even all the British. This is just the main part of the story. It doubles when you get to everybody involved in the side. So there's 90 ships total, not counting convoy JW55A and its through escort. So you wind up pretty much doubling everything. So we're not going to do that. So I start out, I recycled this PowerPoint. I wrote a documentary on this ship that just came out a few months ago. And this was the presentation to discuss the writing of the documentary. But we're going to recycle a few things here, but I was able to take some screen caps from the documentary for the maps because their digital artists are much better than my hand scribbles. So this is the quote that Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser said at the end: "Gentlemen, the battle against Scharnhorst has ended in victory for us. I hope that any of you who are ever called upon to lead a ship into action against an opponent many times superior will command your ship as gallantly as Scharnhorst was commanded today." So the British were very impressed with the Germans and how tenacious they were. So to set the scene, we're not going to go into the history of Scharnhorst all that much. I've talked about the ship in the past. It was built to counter two French battleships. It was kind of middle of the road. Very famous ship up until this point. But we're going to jump to 1943. But since 1941, the Arctic convoys have been going back and forth between Iceland, Scotland, and Russia, supplying, well, critical supplies for the Eastern Front. But when the Germans moved their battle fleet to Norway to get it out of the range of long-range British bombers, they started to threaten these convoys. And they had tried a few times to sink them. Didn't get much progress. You know, the U-boats were also a threat. But we're going to jump to March 14, 1943. Scharnhorst arrives in Norway and in a shocking state of repair. The ship, right before it left Germany, they said she needs at least 6 months of repairs before she can go to Norway. And the Kriegsmarine High Command said, we're going to send her anyway. She limps in on 2 screws. She has to immediately go into repairs. There's no dry dock up there, so they send a repair ship alongside and start doing what they can. And she's just shocking at how bad the ship is. It hasn't been repainted under the hull, so you see those beautiful pristine models with the red hull. All that paint's been scraped off. It's covered in barnacles. It's probably 3 knots slower at its maximum speed because of that. And the engines of Scharnhorst are extremely susceptible to shock at this point. It's going to become a little important later on. So the British decide, with the German ships operating in Norway, that enough is enough. They're going to get them. So Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser of the Home Fleet planned to neutralize Scharnhorst by using convoy JW55B as bait and draw the Germans out for Christmas 1943. And they're going to lay a brilliant trap. And as we'll see here shortly, it all goes in the favor of the British. But the Germans in 43 are trying to intercept these convoys a year before the Battle of the Barents Sea had taken place, where a gentleman named Admiral Kumetz had taken Hipper and the Panzerschiff Admiral Scheer and tried to intercept a convoy, and they'd made a hash of it. So the Germans were now in a position where they had to kind of impress Hitler with what they could do. And they were going to take out one of these convoys. So convoy JW55B is headed to Russia. Another convoy, RA55A, was returning to the UK. So you have convoy JW55A arriving in Murmansk. You have convoy JW55B, that is the second half of JW55A, of course, on its way to Russia. And then coming back, you have 2 convoys that are returning. So there's 4 convoys that are in the area at this time. And the Germans decide they're going to go for 55B. So the state of affairs in 1943, Scharnhorst was the only fully operational battleship or even heavy unit in Norway. Tirpitz has been attacked. She's in, turbines are knocked off their mounts. Needs massive repairs, 6 months of repairs, and will never really put to sea again. So the players, of course, we have the Bait, convoy JW55B, departs Scotland on 20 December 1943, and it's slated to arrive 10 days later, 30th December 1943. It's 19 cargo ships escorted by destroyers. It's escorted by some other ships too, corvettes. But like I said, if we talk about all these ships, we'll be here till the end of time. And they're going to Kola Inlet, which is Murmansk in the Soviet Union. And here is the only picture I could find of one of the JW convoys. So kind of cool. So the Hunters. We have two forces. We have Force 1, which was previously escorting convoy JW55A. So as JW55A gets to Russia, the heavy escort comes back and is going to be half of this pincer movement to trap Scharnhorst. Vice Admiral Robert Burnett, who's a very capable gentleman, he has 3 cruisers, Belfast, Norfolk, and Sheffield. Belfast is still afloat today. She's in the Thames in London. You can go see her. And here's Robert Burnett. I love these names. Admiral Sir Robert Lindsay Burnett, GB, all these letters after his name. So it's the 10th Cruiser Squadron, or Force 1, and I always thought he had a big head. I mean, doesn't he? But even other pictures of this was the most flattering picture I could find. So here is his cruisers. There's Belfast, which you can still see today. I tried to get as many photographs from 43 as possible to kind of show you what these ships looked like in the moment. Here's his other cruiser, HMS Norfolk, and then HMS Sheffield. This is later war. You can tell by the camouflage here, but I couldn't find anything from 43. This is 45. Force 2, this is the heavy unit. This is where Admiral Sir Bruce Austin Fraser, the first Baron Fraser of the North Cape GB. I love these names. So he has 2 ships, HMS Duke of York, HMS Jamaica, which is a cruiser, and then his 4 escorting destroyers. This is a Norwegian destroyer that the British built, gave to the Norwegian government in exile so they could put some of their sailors on board to go fight Germans. We're not going to talk too much about the destroyers. They become important at the end, but otherwise, if we start talking about those, we'll be here all day. So here's Sir Bruce Austin Fraser. So he's commander-in-chief of the home fleet. And one thing with the British is their top people would go out on these operations. So HMS Duke of York, battleship, commissioned 1941. She's the sister ship of Prince of Wales, which engaged Bismarck. 42,000 tons, 745 feet long, 28.3 knots, 14.7 inches of armor on the main belt. To give you an idea, that's about the same armor belt as Yamato. These ships are extremely heavily armored, but they're not very well armed. 14-inch guns, that's pretty low. But they have 10 of them. And here she is. There are 4 guns here, 2 here, 4 in the back, so all 10 of them. I always like this shot. Looks kind of dramatic. And there's the gun. There's the business end of Duke of York. Now up here you can see her radar. So she has both surface search and gunnery radar. And passive sensors too. So she can pick up radar pulses from almost any bandwidth. But critically, 2 separate systems for tracking and then laying those guns in. She can even see on radar the splash of her own shells. So she can see the target, they can see where the shells are landing, so it can be pitch black in the worst weather possible, and she can still land hits. Germans can't do that. Here's HMS Jamaica. Kind of a neat paint scheme. I always like that one. So here's the Germans. So this whole thing was concocted by Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. And he is the guy who replaced Erich Raeder as Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine in 1943 after he resigned. This will be the only exercise or Operation Ostfront, which is what the Germans will codename this operation. It's the only time he'll send surface units to sea. He has no confidence in any of this at this point, but he decides he's going to try it anyway. He will go on to succeed Hitler as president of Germany in 1945, and then he does 10 years for war crimes. He probably should have done more. This is the guy this guy, I mean, look at that face. I mean, this is a flattering picture. He looks like Nosferatu or something. It's just terrifying. Yeah. There are a few pictures of him smiling, and it is terrifying. Like it's that is him smiling. So this is Admiral Schneewind, Otto Schneewind. Now he is the guy who takes over for Gunter Lütjens, who was killed on Bismarck. So he becomes a combined Marine Group North, Marine Commando Nord, and he becomes the fleet chief. Lütjens was the fleet chief, and this guy succeeded him, and they combined the two offices. So you watch documentaries that talk about Group North. He's head of Group North, and he's head of the fleet. Now, this is the guy who's actually going to go to sea. This is Vice Admiral Eric Bay. Eric Bay is promoted to Vice Admiral on Christmas Day, right before he gets to head this operation. And for some reason, they call him Ahmed. They always called him Ahmed Bey, and nobody knows where that name comes from. But even is it? That must be where it comes from. But everybody called him Ahmed, and even his underlings, Admiral Ahmed. He's the guy who leads the destroyers at the Battle of Narvik, all three battles of the Narvik, in 10 to 13 April during the invasion of Norway in 40. And all of his ships get sunk, and he still gets awarded the Knight's Cross for it. I don't really know how that works, but he did. He was also leader of the destroyers during the Channel Dash, where the Germans moved the battleships from France to Germany through the English Channel, and the British did nothing about it. So maybe he did deserve the Iron Cross, I'm not sure. So he's promoted to Rear Admiral on Christmas Day, 1943. Lucky him to lead this mission. He was not the first choice. Admiral Kumetz was on sick leave after Tirpitz was severely damaged and thought he better go home for a little R&R because he'd screwed that up. Captain of Scharnhorst is this guy who looks just like my grandfather, not just a little bit. I showed this picture to my dad, and he said, I didn't know my dad was a battleship captain in World War II. It looks just like him. It's terrifying. But I love this guy because he got up at 10 a.m. every day just like me, and he had to have a nap between 1 and 3. And nobody was to disturb him unless the ship was sinking. And it was his dream to command a battleship. But I mean, I love that. Between 1 and 3, that's where you'll find me. Sometimes between 1 and 5, you never know. So here's Scharnhorst. She's commissioned in 1939. 38,000 tons, 770 feet, 8 inches long, speed of 31 knots, 3 knots faster than Duke of York. Very heavily armored, 13.8 inches. Little guns, big armor. A lot of people call her a battle cruiser. Battle cruisers are big guns, little armor, kind of an inside-out battle cruiser. 9 11-inch guns. You're not going to penetrate much armor with 11-inch guns. So a pocket battleship is a term that they applied to the 3 overgunned heavy cruisers that the Germans built between 29 and 37. Those were 15,000-ton cruisers with 11-inch guns on them. Now, it was a cruiser hull, a cruiser armor scheme, but with World War I-ish caliber battleship main guns. And it's what kicks off this arms race, because the press took one look at it, and they called them pocket battleships in the English-speaking press. The Germans always refer to them as armored ship, Panzerschiffe. And they didn't make much of it, but it kicks off this second naval arms race. So the Germans build the pocket battleships. The French respond with the Dunkirk and Strasbourg. That scares the Germans. They build Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. The British start building new battleships. The Italians get into it, and eventually you go all the way up to Yamato. It's what kicks this whole thing off. Scharnhorst is an enlargement of that idea, but on a battleship scale. Now, there's always this stuff you'll read, and people will say, well, they were going to rearm them with 15-inch guns. That's not true. The ships were too small to take 15-inch guns. That's why when they decided to rearm the sister ship Gneisenau 15-inch guns, they were going to have to add almost 70 feet to the hull to carry the displacement. So what they were going to do was arm them with 13.8-inch guns later on. They were designed for that. They never made the 13.8-inch gun. So they went straight from 11-inch to 15-inch, and then they said, well, we got all these 15-inch guns. We'll put them on a lengthened hull. So that's what they were intending to do. If the war hadn't happened, these would have eventually been rearmed pretty quickly with 13.8-inch guns. They just didn't finish them. So here's Scharnhorst. The beam, I think, is 108 feet on Scharnhorst, 106. I'd have to look it up for you. I don't remember. So both Bismarck and Scharnhorst and Eisenhower Tirpitz are very good gunnery platforms. They were almost too stable, and you know what goes on with that. You know, a ship that's too stable, it tends to, instead of rolling gently, it will hang and then snap back, and it causes a lot of issues with trying to aim your guns, because instead of something you can easily adjust for, it's like you know, up and down, and they were almost too stable. So you need a little bit of roll in your ship. So here she is. This is an early war picture. She still has her shield on the bow, and there's a bunch of other things. She still has her second aircraft. So this is about 1940. No, this is much bigger. This is not much smaller than Bismarck. It's a full-scale battleship, just with smaller caliber guns. So we're looking at almost 800 feet. It's about 100 feet shorter than USS Iowa, USS Missouri. About 70 feet shorter than Bismarck. But you needed that extra length to carry and weight to carry those 15-inch guns. So accompanying Scharnhorst is going to be these 5 destroyers. This is Rolf Johannesson, and he's going to be aboard Z-29. Z-33 is always supposed to stay with Scharnhorst, no matter what happens. Those two are supposed to be together, and we'll see what happens with that here in a minute. So Operation Ostfront. So this was the original order. Bunch of stuff here, but do not abandon the battle prematurely. Commit fully to the mission. Scharnhorst's superior firepower is your paramount advantage. Withdraw if the situation warrants it, and retreat immediately upon encountering superior enemy forces. Grand Admiral Dönitz, Heil and Sieg. So this was the original order. He wrote this so that the specific orders could be drafted from this. But this right down here gives them an out. If you encounter superior enemy forces, keep that in mind. So here's what they're going to do. Here's the convoy coming up. Scharnhorst is in Altafjord, northern Norway. She's going to come out here and get the convoy. The British, with Force 2 and Force 1, are going to sweep in a pincer movement and get her before she gets to the convoy. So here's Force 2 chugging up right behind JW55B. Here's Murmansk. The convoy is going to come up here and circle around. Remember, this is a globe, so it's more of a straight shot than what it looks like. So Force 1 had been escorting JW55A to Murmansk. She's the distant cover, and Force 2 is the distant cover for JW55B. As Force 1 is finished here, she's going to double back for that pincer movement, and then Scharnhorst is supposed to come right out here, and guess what she does? So timing is everything. Fraser's strategy, position, we already talked about that. But the convoy still remains vulnerable. There's U-boats in the area, and then we have to remember the Germans also have those destroyers. So the Germans actually discover Force 2 chugging up along the Norwegian coast, but they don't do anything about it. They're first detected by the Luftwaffe. They just figure it's a merchant ship, and they kind of blow it off. Should have investigated. They probably could have stopped this whole thing. Here's a comparison of Scharnhorst and Duke of York before we get any further. It's 31 knots for Scharnhorst, 28.3 knots for Duke of York. Now remember, Scharnhorst probably can't make 31 knots now with her poor engines and fouled hull and everything else. So the U-boats come out of Narvik here, and they're going to take up a line in front of the convoy, try to get as many ships as they can before Scharnhorst comes out. They get into position, but the weather is extremely bad. It goes from being okay to just some of the most appalling weather a battle's ever been fought in. And it's going to continue to be bad. And the weather plays a big part in all this. But the U-boats come up here. They're going to try to wolf pack the convoy. They get off one torpedo, and the convoy passes them before they can get into position again. The convoy's traveling between 6 and 10 knots, but the U-boats can't get back into position because of the weather. And so they're kind of out of it now, but they're going to shadow the convoy. What happened to my... Oh, help if I didn't click on things like an idiot. So here's a picture of Scharnhorst right before she leaves. So the radar's turned away, so we know this is probably an official photo, or at least they're taking official photos. It doesn't look like a very good photo to me. But this is her final camouflage scheme here. And this is going to change a few times, but this is probably less than a week before, taken less than a week before she sails. So Scharnhorst intends to intercept the convoy just south of Bear Island, which is this spit of nothing up here. And they believe the convoy is lightly escorted. Also, here's the ship in the final paint scheme. And I just wanted to note that battleships at this time, military ships, use glossy paint. So when you're painting your models completely flat, is not always correct. So Christmas Day, 1943 at 7 p.m., Scharnhorst finally sets sail to intercept the convoy. She's 2 hours behind schedule. They think this is going to be a disaster because they're going to be out of position. The convoy is going to be further along. She's accompanied by her 5 destroyers. JW55B, 250 miles ahead here. And the Germans anticipate by 9:30 a.m. they're going to be in the middle of the convoy to shooting it up. So Scharnhorst set sail without her B-Dienst team, which is her onboard. It's like their code breakers, their intelligence team. They're on leave in Germany because it's Christmas. Half the crew's on leave. So a large portion of her crew is made up by cadets and people they've taken off the damaged Tirpitz, which is really, an unlucky turn for them. Here's a really good picture of Duke of York in Iceland. I think this is colorized. I don't think that's an original color photo, but it looks really cool. So Scharnhorst comes up here like this, and she starts searching for the convoy. Scharnhorst has surface search radar. The Germans are obsessed with the British tracking them using their radar pulses, and the Germans have very good detection equipment for radar, and they assume the British also have very good detection systems, which they do, so they're very scared of using the radios and the radar. So Scharnhorst comes up here and starts looking around for the convoy. So U-716, which is part of that wolf pack, reported the convoy 30 nautical miles west of the previous. So they thought the convoy was here, but it's actually here. So the Germans leaving 2 hours late, it's actually not a big deal. So now they're actually in perfect position. If Scharnhorst keeps sailing this way, he's going to run right into the convoy. But we'll see what happens next. He gets up here like this, and he goes, I don't see the convoy. And he comes back down here to the southwest. I don't see the convoy. And he makes this hard, abrupt right turn to the north. And he seems to have forgotten he had 5 destroyers with him. And he signaled the destroyers with a Morse lamp. They didn't reply because they didn't see it because the weather is horrendous. And they keep traveling to the southwest. Scharnhorst turns north, and then the Germans went, the bay on Scharnhorst just kind of goes, well, okay, we'll figure it out later. And seems to have forgotten all that he had destroyers. So the lack of this coordination between the two, and they won't radio each other. The Germans actually have a radio system and a UHF frequency that the British don't even know about. So they can talk freely, and the British can't hear them. They can't pick up the radio pulses. So they could have just been talking like crazy, but they didn't. So Bay gets up here, and by, 8:30 a.m., he's reconsidered and starts turning back to the north. And with his destroyers now down here, he is now actually set up a pretty good thing here, because now he has the destroyers on the back side. He's on the front side of the convoy. But like I said, he's not coordinating. So here I have a thing about the radar. So is there anything here? Yeah, the Germans are, the Johannesson and the destroyers, he's very frustrated because he can't turn on his radar to search for the convoy. He now knows Scharnhorst has gone off on her own. They can't talk to each other. They can't use their radar unless Bay specifically says, yes, go ahead and turn on your radar. Nobody's using radar even though they have it. And in the meantime, the Germans are now picking up the radar pulses from the convoy. Force 1 and Force 2 are using a different type of radar that the Germans didn't know about yet, and they can't pick up the pulses. They have no idea. The German radar detecting equipment, which was called Bali on Scharnhorst, is very, very good, but it's not using that wavelength. So Bay has no idea these ships are closing in on him. He can pick up the convoy, and he has a general idea which direction it is from the radar pulses. But now he finds himself in this situation. Force 1 is now coming up like this, and this is December 26th at 8 a.m. The convoy turns back, or Scharnhorst turns back to the northeast searching for the convoy, while the destroyers continue this direction. Scharnhorst, still looking around, turns back to the south, thinking they'd overshot the convoy. We don't see it. We haven't run into it. We must have passed it. So he turns back south again, and at 8:43 a.m., HMS Norfolk, Force 1, identified Scharnhorst to the north, 16 miles away, and by 8:50, Scharnhorst is turning south, and we get first contact. So Scharnhorst is spotted at 9:21 a.m., 13,000 yards, and is illuminated by a star shell from Belfast, HMS Belfast. So Scharnhorst is sitting there, no radar, they have no idea anything's around, and they fire a star shell, which is a phosphorus shell, and when it goes off, it turns day or night into day. And the Germans are extremely startled. They're not at action stations. They're not ready for any of this. And with Scharnhorst not using radar, completely surprised. The British are very, very ready. And Force 1 opens fire at 10,000 yards. It doesn't take long for a ship to cover 3,000 yards. They are ready. And they cause minor damage to Scharnhorst. One's fatally wounded, several other wounded. But Scharnhorst forward radar, in one of those miracle hits, shell goes through the radar. They're now blind forward. They have radar at the stern, looking back, they can cover about an angle like this, but forward they're now completely blind. So if they want to use radar, they can't. So the attack ends at 9:38 a.m. as Scharnhorst increases speed and turns to the southeast. These cruisers are faster than Scharnhorst, but Scharnhorst is such a big ship, and in this horrible storm, she can plow through it. The cruisers are just getting beat up, so they can't follow. So here's Scharnhorst in bad weather. This is early war, 1942. So Burnett in Force 1 decides to head back to the convoy because he knows there's destroyers around, and he decides, well, if I can't chase it, I'd better get back to the convoy and protect that. That's my primary mission. Because what he does not want is Scharnhorst anywhere in this area here. He knows Scharnhorst is probably going to make another run on the convoy, so he needs to be up here because Admiral Burnett figures Scharnhorst is going to loop around like this and come back in for another run, which is exactly what they do. So Scharnhorst by 10 a.m. completely gone off the radar because they're just motoring down here, probably close to 30 knots, high 20s, running away as fast as they can. So Fraser orders convoy JW55B to turn north, get them out of this area. We know where Scharnhorst is. And then Fraser detaches 4 destroyers from the convoy to bolster Force 1. So now Force 1 is 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers. So Bay finally communicates with his destroyers and realizes they're 40 miles away going in the wrong direction. So he wants to set up an ambush with his destroyers. So they set a rendezvous point. And he says, be here, I'll be here, we'll get the convoy, it'll be great. Oops. So U-277 now sends a report that misreports the convoy moving east because they see these destroyers detaching, going bound to meet Force 1, and give Bay a bunch of bad information. So he thinks that the convoy is now moving like this, but it's actually moving due north to get out of the battle zone. Fraser has disagreed with Burnett over the radio on breaking off the pursuit. So Burnett in Force 1, he's now really second-guessing himself. You know, should I have followed? What should I do? And so he's kind of rattled through all of this. But here's Force 2, still chugging up. Scharnhorst, so she's here, still turning away. But critically, a Luftwaffe flying boat spots Force 2, sees it visually, a battleship, a cruiser, and the accompanying destroyers, and reports that back to Norway. But Bay is not informed that Force 2 is moving in. It actually gets all the way to Group North, and then all the way to Berlin, and they don't bother to send the report. They just assume that Bay knows that it's coming. So he adjusts course, Bay adjusts course to the southwest for a second run on the convoy. He comes down here and he comes back like this, and he's going to come back around the backside. So he's going to do some maneuvering down here. And his planned rendezvous position for the destroyers is 20 miles southwest of Scharnhorst, so down here. So he's going to put the destroyers here. He's going to come up here, and he's going to have the convoy in his own pincer movement. So the second encounter happens because Force 1 is now between Scharnhorst and the convoy. There's no way Scharnhorst is going to make it without sighting these cruisers again. So for the second time, Belfast detects Scharnhorst at noon. Sheffield, Norfolk, and the 4 destroyers confirm the contact. There's only one ship that they know operating out there, and so they know it has to be Scharnhorst. So by 12:21, the Germans are extremely surprised again as they get lit up and not at battle stations, not ready. Turrets are trained fore and aft. They're so close that JW-55B is going to witness this battle. They can see it on the horizon. They can see the flashes of the guns. So they start firing each other again. Scharnhorst at close range, damaging Sheffield. Norfolk hit by Sheffield, and turret incapacitated. We had crew casualties. So this one actually draws blood. Bay orders Scharnhorst to accelerate and head back to the south and try to get some distance in here. So Burnett ceases fire. Scharnhorst extends the gap to 7 miles. That's how close they're fighting because the weather's so bad. They could barely see each other at 7 miles, but with the superior British radar, they're still tracking them. So Bay realizes this is a superior force at this point. He doesn't want to deal with this. He's like, you know what, we're going to go back. This is too hard, and I don't want to deal with it. So he sends a report back to Narvik saying, we have several heavy units. Doesn't really say which heavy units. But he retreats to the southeast of Norway. They're going to go home. They're done. This battle is over as far as they're concerned.
In terms of just Scharnhorst against the 3 British cruisers, was that a fair fight?
Scharnhorst should have been able to just wipe them from the sea. But with the bad weather, Bay's not exactly the right guy for the job. Like I said, he was a destroyer guy. Now he has to lead this whole mission, and he had to plan it himself. I didn't mention that earlier. He had a staff of like 4 people to plan this thing. And Kumets, when he went back and left Tirpitz, he took all of his staff with him. So all the people who were strategic thinkers and all this, they're gone. So it's this guy who has no experience. I mean, it would be like a Cessna pilot trying to fly a 747. Like, that's what he's been given. Plan this major operation and, don't screw it up. So when it starts getting hairy, he's like, you know what, I'm done. This is superior force, I'm going home. So Burnett this time decides to chase Scharnhorst. The weather's a little bit better. They're at an angle in the sea where the wind is behind the ships, so they're able to keep pace, which is critical because Scharnhorst isn't getting home. And Bay knows that he's behind him now because they still have their radar. They finally turn on their radar when they know the jig is up and see these 3 ships plus the destroyers following them. So Fraser coordinates with Burnett, positions to intercept Scharnhorst. And by 4:30 p.m., they expect to be shooting at each other. So meanwhile, we still have destroyers with us. That rendezvous that they set up, Bay never coordinates with his destroyers. They get to the rendezvous point and there's nobody there, and they're kind of blundering around waiting. And while they're doing that, the convoy is literally right there passing them, and they don't see him. Their Z-38, destroyer Z-38, is probably a couple miles away from the convoy. The weather's really bad, but if they'd had the radar on, they would have seen it. And then that would have been a big problem because all the British fighting ships are down here. The German fighting ships are at that rendezvous point here as the convoy is going by, and they couldn't have gotten back very quickly. And the Germans probably could have got a big portion of the convoy with the destroyers if they turned the radar on. So they came within minutes of JW-55B being, hit hard. And there was very light escort at this point with the convoy. And the convoy at this has gone north, but now as they get closer to Bear Island, they're going to turn back because now the British know exactly where Scharnhorst is. They still don't know where the destroyers are, though. So by 2:30 p.m., Bay finally communicates to the destroyers and just says, go home, we're done. So they head home. We'll never hear about the German destroyers again. Around this time, Captain Hintze reports to the crew, "We're done. We're going home." Everybody thinks this has been a big waste of time. Norfolk experiences mechanical issues, temporary radar loss. She starts lagging behind. And then Belfast, because of some mechanical issues, she's running behind. So Force 1 for a little bit is only one ship, but eventually they get everything fixed. But look what's happening. Scharnhorst is setting south. They're going back to their fjord base. They have no idea what's coming up to get them. So the most embarrassing thing that can happen to you in naval warfare is getting your T crossed. And this is exactly what happens to Bay. So Duke of York detects Scharnhorst at 4:17 p.m. on a radar. Force 1 is following. Force 2 is converging. The British fleet positioned across the T. And I'll show you what that is on the next slide. So Duke of York gunners are ready, and they're radar guided. Like I said, they can even see their own shell splashes. So they know whether they're long, short. They don't need anybody spotting for them. The destroyers, and there are a bunch of them now, 8 destroyers. HMS Jamaica coming up the backside of Force 2. So Scharnhorst increases speed. They don't know the British are here. Man, they're heading southeast by 4:45. So this is what getting your T crossed looks like. So the British can bring all of their guns to bear, and only Scharnhorst can bring her forward guns to bear. And that is the worst tactical position you can be in battleship-sized engagements. This is what happens at the Battle of Jutland to the Germans twice. It's a scary situation because it's hard to get out of. So the first of these encounters here with Duke of York, 4:47 p.m. Remember, they said they were going to be in action at 4:30, so he only missed it by 17 minutes. That's pretty good. Fraser orders Force 1 to fire a star shell. It fails, so Duke of York decides to fire a 14-inch star shell, and that is like the sun coming up when that thing goes off. And Scharnhorst has no idea they're there. And when you see a battleship caliber star shell go, they know they're about to get rocked. So Duke of York incapacitates Scharnhorst's first turret with their first salvo. They fire one salvo. The radar lock is so good, they put a shell right through the forward turret. 33% of her firepower is gone immediately. Kills most of the men inside the turret too, a couple hundred guys. HMS Jamaica starts firing when she gets within range, straddling Scharnhorst. That's where you get shells on one side, shells on the other side, and once you have that lock, you have range, and you just start pouring shells into that spot. Because eventually, law of averages, you're going to start hitting something. Critically, Duke of York's foremast is damaged, and her search radar is disabled. Around the same time, her gunnery radar is disabled, but an ensign climbs to the top of the mast, which is a 10-story mast sitting on top of a 10-story building that's moving in the Arctic storms, and he climbs up there and he splices the wires back together. And I think he got a distinguished service order for that. He got a major award for that one. So Belfast and Norfolk commence firing at 4:59. So now they're under heavy attack. Scharnhorst responds with extremely accurate secondary battery guns against the destroyers that are coming in. And at this time, Duke of York has a system on board that can jam German radar. So they start jamming her radar. And Scharnhorst has radar-guided guns, sort of, but it's a hybrid system. So it's a search radar looking for targets on the sea, but that data can also be sent to their firing computers. But as they're doing that, the British start jamming it. And the Germans are starting to now have to fight using their optical systems, which aren't as good, especially in this weather. And luckily for the Germans, Scharnhorst disables the radar jamming equipment on Duke of York. So her firing gets, it's really bad, and then it starts getting good again, but then the British repair that system, and the German fire starts dropping off. But as these destroyers get closer in, her secondary guns, which are aimed optically, they're doing a really good job. So gunnery on Scharnhorst is actually pretty good, and especially since half her crew was, not normally aboard. So Scharnhorst is going to start using her superior speed at this point, and increases the distance from Force 2 to parallel Force 1, and she just basically starts running away. She's engaging with her aft turret. So Bay reports the engagement with a heavy battleship to Group North, which is quite an understatement as I write here. So Scharnhorst faces a combined force of battleship, 3 cruisers, and multiple destroyers. Two of Fraser's destroyers pull back to avoid friendly fire during the battle. That's how close they get. They're in there firing torpedoes as close as they possibly can. And 5:15, they order another torpedo attack. The destroyers struggle to close in because of Scharnhorst's speed. She's running away. So as she's pulling away, the British have to stop firing. Here's Duke of York in heavy seas. I think this was taken during the operation. So anyway, Scharnhorst is running away to the southwest. Duke of York's using her radar-guided weapons, but Scharnhorst is maneuvering to try to get out of the way and, avoid being shot. Scharnhorst increases the gap by 5:45. Both battleships resort to firing in the darkness at their flashes at this point. So Duke of York can see Scharnhorst, but Scharnhorst can't really see Duke of York. So every time Duke of York fires, they aim for that spot. Duke of York is doing something kind of similar, but at 6:20 p.m., Duke of York scores 2 critical hits on Scharnhorst. The first shell causes fatalities and minimal damage. The second hit, they call it the miracle shot. They fired almost blind at this point. Scharnhorst is out of radar range from Duke of York. She's just pulling away. It's a hazy target. They kind of know where she is. They arc a shell in. It comes in through the deck, goes down into a spot called the boiler hump, which German ship designers didn't always talk to each other while they were putting ships together, and the people who designed the boilers designed them too big. So they wouldn't fit under the armor deck. So they had to make a little bulge in the armor deck. Now the top of that deck is thick armor plating, but the sides of it, about that thick. And it sits about that high. That's all it was. The shell arced in at an angle and went right through that thin hump and right into her boilers, and it cuts the steam line. That's all it does. Doesn't kill anybody. The survivors said they heard a loud bang, and the ship speed just drops by half. Now, the British don't know this. Their radar's malfunctioning on Duke of York. Like I said, her search radar's still out. She has her gunnery radar, but not her search radar. That has not been repaired yet. So they're coming along. They're about to give up. Scharnhorst is running away. We've lost. And then somebody notices on the targeting radar that the distance is stabilized. And then it starts ticking down. And they ask all the other ships in the area, can you confirm this? So, yeah, speed, radar issues. The functioning gunnery radar set finally reveals Scharnhorst's range steady and the being ticking down, so they are gaining. So this is going to be the final battle. They're going to run up on the Germans. Now, the shell arcing into the miracle hit, there's some controversy about that. Some people say that Duke of York hit Scharnhorst, and Scharnhorst's engines were extremely susceptible to shock because they were in such poor condition that maybe the shock of that hit caused the engines to malfunction for a little bit, and they were able to get them functioning at least a little bit towards the end there. So nobody really knows whether that happened or not. Nobody survived to tell that story. So Force 1 starts gaining. Fraser's destroyers close in for another strike. Scharnhorst detects and illuminates the destroyers with star shells. So everybody's got star shells in the air, and you can see them up here. Here's what they look like. Just these big white phosphorus things illuminating the battle. So the destroyers Savage and Salmarez engage with gunfire at close range. They're really not going to do anything with their little guns. Salmarez is hit by an 11-inch shell. There's actually pictures of it. Just a hole straight through him. She suffers engine room damage, torpedo mount damage. Now, Captain Hinsa, he's kind of the real hero of all this. He dodges torpedoes, even at close range. This guy is the guy you want to captain your ship if you're ever under torpedo attack, because he dodges the majority of the torpedoes fired at him. So this is one of my favorite paintings. This really shows what everybody was seeing that day. And look how close these destroyers are. They almost can't miss. So they launch 12 torpedoes. Hinsa dodges all but 3 of them. Force 2 destroyers, after they fire their torpedoes, they're pretty much useless. They're not going to do anything with their guns, so they get out of the way. Duke of York finally repairs her surface search radar, and her accuracy increases with that, and they start bombarding. Jamaica and Belfast are shooting. At this point, Scharnhorst is being dismantled by those 14-inch guns. Duke of York's just picking her apart. This is a track of what the final battle actually looks like. But Scharnhorst counters Duke of York when she gets within visual range. Her turrets are damaged. The forward one's completely destroyed. The second turret is hit and disabled by 7:20 p.m. by 14-inch gun shell fire, and the 11-inch turrets are running out of ammunition. The aft one runs out of ammunition at what I say there 7:30. So just about 10 minutes later, they're out of shells. There are shells in the forward turrets, but they can't get them to the aft turrets. You have to hand carry them. So now Scharnhorst only has her secondary 150 millimeter guns. Captain Hinze signals to Group North that they will fight to the last shell, which is what Bismarck had done. But in Scharnhorst's case, they actually do this. So 10 minutes later, they run out of ammunition. So Scharnhorst is a wreck at this point. Hinze maneuvers Scharnhorst to the southwest in response to Force 1 and the destroyer. So he starts to make a slight right turn. Fraser orders Jamaica to launch torpedo strike on Scharnhorst, and Duke of York pauses her firing for Jamaica to run in. Jamaica sends several torpedoes into her, but Belfast is coming in right behind with another torpedo strike. Hinze evades the 5 torpedoes. Like I said, he's really good. So Opportune and Virago from Force 1 hit Scharnhorst with 4 torpedoes. So now she's taken about 7. They found on the wreck of Scharnhorst 6 confirmed torpedo hits. HMS Musketeer, 2 more hits on the port side. That's disputed now. The destroyers, after they're done, retreat and leave Scharnhorst to Duke of York, who just starts pouring shells into her at this point. So this is really the end. The ship is burning, listing. Everybody in the superstructure is pretty much dead at this point. 10 minutes after they run out of ammunition, Hinze orders the abandoned ship. Very few people are going to get out. Scharnhorst rolls over and sinks 5 minutes later. She's taken at least 6 torpedoes, probably more. The British rescue 36 survivors, and the Admiralty, they signal the Admiralty, Scharnhorst sunk, and they receive the commendation, grand, well done. Typical British understatement there. Casualty estimates for Scharnhorst. Nobody really knows how many people are on board because so many people were on leave. They didn't keep an accurate number. So between 1,930 to 2,030 men are lost. And Scharnhorst sinking pretty much the end of the surface threat convoy to the convoys in the north. The U-boats are still going to be a problem. Just kind of some summary stuff here. Germany receives the news of Scharnhorst sinking, and Dönitz, of course, blames Admiral Bay. And was it Admiral Bay's fault? Kinda. He made a lot of mistakes, but he was kind of put in a position where he probably shouldn't have been. Bay's defeat seen as a result of culmination of setbacks and British naval superiority. They were never getting out of that trap. The British had set this up way too well. The British were extremely confident. It was a really good artist rendition of Scharnhorst in the last few weeks there. If you're going to model Scharnhorst for the North Cape, this is the paint scheme. She probably did sail with these aerial recognition markings because they were supposed to be coordinating with the Luftwaffe, but the weather was so bad it never actually happened. But in the actual orders, it does say, paint your turrets yellow, keep the swastikas so everybody knows who you are. But that's it. That's like the 30,000 foot overview of the battle. So hope you enjoyed it. You guys have any questions?
Yeah, it read that this mission was done under duress, a lot of political pressure due to German defeats on the Eastern Front.
Yes. That was one of the reasons, yeah, because Dönitz wanted to impress Hitler. Hitler had asked the question, "What are you guys doing with these ships?" And it's kind of funny too because Admiral Fraser had escorted one of these convoys through with Duke of York all the way, and arrived in Murmansk and actually got off Duke of York to see what was going on in Murmansk. And the Russians were very upset about this. It was like somebody coming to check on their work, and Fraser found all of the supplies from 3 previous convoys just stacked up in warehouses and hadn't actually gone to the front. And he didn't say anything to the Russians, but he went back to Churchill and he's like, "Why are we doing this? They're not even using this stuff." And Churchill was like, "Yeah, we know, but it looks good." So a lot of these Arctic convoys were kind of just they were almost political in themselves. So the armor belt on these battleships only goes down to the waterline, and sometimes it depends on the ship a little bit below the waterline. So the ship itself, the red portion essentially. I'll show you the armor belt. What did I do with my pointer? The armor belt is the thick part of it is here along here, and then it gets thinner at the ends, but the torpedoes are coming in down here. Now there's a defensive system. Every battleship has a torpedo defense system. They call it the TDS. Different countries use different theories. They were all different levels of bad. Nobody really ever cracked that. But I mean, torpedoing a big ship is, I mean, it's hard to defend against. You can do a pretty good job of it, but the Germans had a system where they had basically a void space and then fuel in cells, and then what they called the shell plating, and then they had what they called the holding bulkhead, and the torpedo damage was supposed to be absorbed in that. But even the Americans, like even at the end of World War II, ours was still kind of.
Well, are you describing what I thought sounded like a half of a tube welded to the hull?
No, they would do that in some cases.
Line that would, the torpedo would hit it, supposedly protect the hull.
Yeah, but that's all internal at this point on these ships. World War I era ships in the 20s, they would weld these bulges on the side of them to protect for that. But in ships like Scharnhorst, that system's built in. So you can imagine the outer skin of the ship, but inside of that, in this red portion here, is the torpedo defense system. And then inboard of that, like if you're looking at a cross section of the ship, then you have the engines, the boilers, and everything in there. It's kind of the inside of a battleship is actually much smaller than what you see here. The deck is armored, so the armor Scharnhorst has 2 armor decks. It's not the main deck here. That's actually quite thin. But then you go to an armor deck here, and then the main armor deck below it. And those 2 decks are connected with what they call a turtleback armor scheme. So it's almost like a turtle shell, essentially. And the idea was to, at certain angles, the shells would have to go through 2, maybe even 3 armor plates in order to get into something vital. And the idea was, you stop the shell. The Germans were the only ones doing this in World War II. That turtleback armor. But no, she had 2 armored decks. But like I said, her armor deck had that little raise in it, and they, came up about 18 inches. And the sides of that were armored with 80-inch or 80 millimeter plate. So the top, if something comes in at a high angle, probably going to defeat it. But a 14-inch shell would just slice right through that 80 millimeter hump, basically.
Was that on the deck that you could, like the upper deck or
It,
deck below?
the boiler hump was right about here. It came up from about here to here. Of course, I'm exaggerating it, but it was about 18 inches. You see the armor deck, and it would stop, and it went up a little bit, like a half deck. It was a really bad idea.
Wasn't the one with the upper deck?
Right. Yeah. There were 2 armored decks. Well, if you remember, let me know. Yes, so the ship's upside down. So you can see there's a lot of damage that when she sank, her B turret magazine exploded. And basically everything from about here forward, the biggest piece is about the size of your car. It detonated and just blew this.
Do you know how deep? I was wondering how far down the torpedoes hit that hull.
That would be interesting to know. There is a report on that, and I've read it, but I didn't memorize the depth of because they've only visited the wreck with ROVs once, and that was in 2000. So I don't know because I know what you're asking there. I would imagine they would be at different levels because the sea and the ship, I mean, they were in a pretty bad storm, so.
Torpedoes that the British use because they sometimes try to use just a contact to the metal and they try to get the ship underneath.
Underneath it, yeah. So they had the magnetic torpedoes. But there's at least 6 holes that they did count. But of course, there would have been more up here, but that's gone. So 6 confirmed out of.
So it would be fair to to say that the Germans were arrogant, thinking they could take on the Royal Navy?
Yeah, I mean they built these ships and they were too weak to fight anybody. I mean, they could have taken on the French. They by 1940 they couldn't have even taken on the Italians. And of course they were their allies at that point. But the Italian Navy was far more modern. They had more battleships. In some cases they were better built. You know, if the Italians had built these ships and the Germans had done the gunnery, they would have been very terrifying. But
Well, what Germans or the Raiders that told him was, don't start the war until we can build a navy?
that would have been Raider, yeah, Raider.
That brings up it's like I was talking to some buddies today about the best ally we had.
Yeah, I mean he was pretty bad at screwing things up, and that's why they never assassinated the guy. I mean, let him let him keep doing what he's doing. Yeah, so that's an Arado AR-196. This area here is the hangar. So these wings would fold down, and then they would lower it inside the hangar. So on the final mission, I believe the 196 was aboard, but it was in the hangar.
So you mentioned a star shell several times.
Uh-huh.
The British used that to initiate the ambush, or what was
Yeah, to light things up so they can see what they're doing. The guns they're radar aimed, but they're still optically aimed too. So these things right here are the local control rangefinders, and then up here are the big 30-meter rangefinders. And the Germans used a system that was extremely taxing on your eyes, but the British didn't. But if you could see a target and get the range visually with these rangefinders, it was very easy to hit with the main guns. Like it was quick and powerful what would rain down on you. So if they could see you, they could hit you. The British used star shells. I emphasize the British because they're always surprising the Germans, but the Scharnhorst was using star shells too. And they're big phosphorus explosive charges on parachutes. So
Germans weren't expecting to run into anything bigger than escort destroyers.
escort destroyers, maybe a cruiser, but 3 cruisers that they weren't expecting was a little bit much, and that's why they decided to call it. They've been ambushed twice. You know what? We're going home. And the guy in charge, Bay, he's not up to the job. It's not what he was trained to do. And he even told Admiral Schneewind, he's like, I'm probably not the guy for this. And they're like, well, you're the guy in the area, so you're going to do it. But any other questions, comments, concerns?
Just for kicks, there are 4 round things, kind of amidships. Up. There you go, that guy.
Anti-aircraft gun rangefinders.
Okay.
You know what they called these?
Bowling balls.
Chinese woks, because they look like upside down Chinese woks. So yeah. Yeah, even the Germans had a sense of humor when it came to that stuff. But yeah, that's what they were called. They're actually called SK-34s, but they called them the Chinese woks. I just threw that in there because a lot of, people are, the ships were glossy. The paint they used was a semi-gloss. I mean, that's pretty much accurate for the U.S. Navy too, I would say. The Japanese. If you look at close-up photos, or if you get them at the right angle, there's a famous picture of Bismarck where she's almost blinding because of the brand new glossy paint. But that paint was not a flat paint. So large-scale modelers will put a little gloss into it. It's not completely flat. I just threw that in there because the ship was looking shiny. Yeah, it would have. You didn't use a flat, but I'm just saying if you build a larger model, they did use gloss, and the paint colors here are kind of approximate because there's still dispute about this paint scheme, how it actually looked, and it may be because they changed it a couple times. It was supposed to look like waves and kind of hide the direction of the ship and stuff, and nobody really knows what colors they used.
Was her sister ship the Nice now?
Yes. Yeah, and she's bombed and never. What's that?
Or not, Nice now is bombed in Montevideo, right?
No, that was Graf Spee. That's Graf Spee, yeah.
say that I think Bismarck inspired Wilhelm to kill Rudolph Diesel.
Nobody knows what happened to Rudolph Diesel, so maybe. I mean, that's a whole other conspiracy story.
One of the Eisenhower's turrets still in Norway.
Yeah, I think there's 2 of them, and they fire them on occasion as a. Yeah, so the Gneisenau's turrets were taken off and used as coastal defense batteries in Norway. And they're still pretty much as they were taken off the ship, except they're painted green now, I think. But
Are these bigger than the Bismarck?
no,
No.
no. These are 11-inch. Bismarck carried 15-inch.
I mean ship-wise.
No, about 70 feet shorter. Bismarck was 53,000 tons full load. Scharnhorst about 34,000 full load. About 20,000 tons heavier. But Scharnhorst actually carried a thicker main belt armor. Her armor was about an inch thicker than Bismarck's, believe it or not. So people call it a battle cruiser, but it was better armored than Bismarck in some spots, not everywhere. But
The sister ships, you listen, the color on the top of the turrets, were they different colors?
different colors for different operations at different times. So
Trying to find out which ship.
that's what the Americans did. The Germans were very worried about their own aircraft bombing ships. That's why the Italians had those barber poles on the bow and everything, because pilots really bad at spotting ships. The British would even fall into that. Famously during the Bismarck the Bismarck exercise, the British attacked one of their own cruisers, and they were able to dodge all the torpedoes. But if you're flying around at 10,000 feet, these ships look mighty small. So that's why they painted the swastikas and had the giant yellow blobs on the turrets. So anything else? Oh, yeah.
Regarding naval stuff,
I try.
Pretty U.S. Park Service. He was also an artist. He was hired because he was an artist, and they trained him to be a diver. He dove on the aerosol and did a drawing of what it looks like at the bottom.
Inside, yeah.
The forward turret is still on the thing, but the other turrets were actually removed and placed on hilltops in the Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah, there was a lot of the parts from those ships that were recycled at Pearl Harbor, as much as they could get off and use, especially in the reconstruction and everything. So, yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah, well, certainly. I'd appreciate that. Great. Yeah, I'll take that.
The thing that surprised me about that, the U.S. Park Service is in charge of any shipwrecks in U.S. water.
Right. Yeah, so they're in charge of Arizona now.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you.